On a cold morning in the spring of 1860, buyers crowded the slave market on Chalmers Street in Charleston, South Carolina. Traders inspected hands, shoulders, teeth, and scars with practiced eyes. Prices were shouted, ledgers were opened, and another day of buying and selling began much like any other. Then one man stepped onto the auction platform, and everything briefly stopped. According to later accounts preserved in newspapers, private letters, and scattered legal records, this enslaved man spoke with remarkable precision. He could read without hesitation. He could write in an elegant hand. He understood Latin phrases, quoted passages from scripture from memory, and reportedly solved arithmetic problems faster than some of the merchants gathered around him. In a society where educating enslaved people was often outlawed and harshly punished, his knowledge should not have existed at all. No one seemed able to explain how he had learned so much. Some believed he had secretly studied in the library of a wealthy plantation owner. Others whispered that a minister had risked everything to teach him. A few suspected he had once belonged to a family that quietly valued education more than the laws of the South allowed, yet none of those stories matched the surviving records. What made the mystery even stranger was what happened after the auction. For years, researchers searching plantation inventories, probate files, census schedules, shipping manifests, and Charleston business records found only fragments of his trail. His name appeared under different spellings. His age shifted from document to document. Owners changed. Counties changed. At one point, it seemed as though he had simply vanished from history. Then, more than a century later, historians comparing unrelated archives noticed something they had overlooked for decades. A faded plantation ledger from the South Carolina Lowcountry contained an unusual notation beside the name of one enslaved man. It was only a handful of words, written almost as an afterthought by someone who likely never imagined future generations would read them. Those words suggested the man sold in Charleston was not merely unusually educated. They hinted that powerful people may have been trying to hide exactly how he became that way, and why his knowledge frightened them enough to erase as much of his story as they could. The deeper historians looked, the less this appeared to be the story of a single auction. It became the story of a man whose education challenged the foundations of an entire system, and whose forgotten life was buried beneath thousands of ordinary records, waiting for someone to piece them back together. The notation occupied less than a single line. Its ink had browned with age, and the corner of the plantation ledger had nearly crumbled away. Most researchers would have turned the page without a second thought. One historian almost did. The ledger belonged to a rice plantation outside Georgetown, South Carolina. It had survived war, floods, careless storage, and decades of neglect before finding its way into a county archive. Most of its entries were painfully ordinary. Corn, rice, livestock, tools. Human beings listed beside livestock as property. Every few pages, another inventory. Another valuation. Another reminder of how slavery reduced lives to numbers. The one entry stood apart. Not because it was longer. Because it contained words that did not belong in a plantation account book. Beside the name Isaac appeared a brief note. Reads exceptionally well, keep from visitors. Nothing more. No explanation. No signature. Just 6 unsettling words. The historian copied the entry into his notebook. At first, he assumed it referred to a trusted house servant. Perhaps someone who handled correspondence. Such cases, while rare, did exist. Some enslavers quietly educated enslaved men when it served business interests. Bookkeepers, clerks, personal attendants. Literacy could be useful. But it was also dangerous. Especially after the 1831 Nat Turner Rebellion. Across much of the South, laws tightened. Teaching enslaved people to read became a criminal offense in many places. Churches restricted instruction. Books disappeared. Patrols increased. Even possession of written material could invite severe punishment. South Carolina had become especially vigilant. Charleston officials feared ideas almost as much as weapons. Printed words crossed boundaries that chains could not. That made the ledger's note difficult to explain. If Isaac truly read exceptionally well, why record it at all? Why preserve evidence of something the law discouraged? And why add the instruction? Keep from visitors. Visitors included neighboring planters, traveling merchants, inspectors, business partners, even distant relatives. Someone wanted Isaac hidden. Not physically, intellectually. The historian searched further. Another ledger surfaced. Different plantation. Different owner. Nearly identical handwriting. Again Isaac appeared. This time with another curious notation. Copied correspondence accurately. No mention of punishment. No mention of field labor. Instead, correspondence. Letters. Business records. Financial accounts. That changed everything. Rice plantations depended upon constant communication. Exports. Insurance. Shipping schedules. Debt collection. Land purchases. Errors cost fortunes. A literate assistant would have been valuable beyond measure. Yet openly acknowledging such a man risked criticism from fellow enslavers. The contradiction deepened. Isaac remained hidden. Useful enough to trust. Dangerous enough to conceal. Meanwhile, Charleston newspapers from late 1859 revealed another intriguing detail. Advertisements for slave auctions occasionally highlighted physical strength. Skilled blacksmiths, carpenters, brick masons, coopers. Rarely, very rarely. Education. One advertisement caught the historian's attention. Its wording had faded on the surviving copy. Several lines were unreadable. But one phrase remained surprisingly clear. Uncommon capacity. That was all. No occupation. No trade. No explanation. Just two words. Uncommon capacity. Auction advertisements depended upon attracting buyers. Every word mattered. Could that phrase describe Isaac? No surviving newspaper identified him by name. Yet the timing matched. So did the location. Charleston. Spring approaching. Slave traders preparing for another busy season. The historian visited Charleston's preserved auction district. Little remained exactly as it had appeared in 1860. Modern buildings stood where crowded yards once echoed with sales. Tourists passed without realizing what had happened beneath their feet. Brick walls remained. Iron fixtures survived. Stone foundations endured. Silent witnesses. Standing there, he reread eyewitness descriptions written before the Civil War. Buyers asked questions. Inspected scars. Examined muscles. Checked teeth. Measured value. Education almost never entered the conversation. When it did, it often lowered confidence rather than raising it. An educated enslaved man represented uncertainty. Questions. Resistance. Influence. Ideas. Not every buyer wanted that risk. Then another record emerged. This one from a Charleston merchant. His account book listed purchases made during auction week. Cotton. Sugar. Timber. Then one unusual expense. Premium paid above estimate. No explanation followed. Historians dislike coincidence. Premiums happened. Strong workers commanded higher prices. Skilled craftsmen did as well. But the amount recorded exceeded expectations by nearly 40%. Someone had competed aggressively. Why? What made one enslaved man worth so much? The merchant's remaining papers offered only fragments. Several pages had vanished decades earlier. Others had suffered water damage. Names dissolved into stains. Dates blurred. Yet one surviving letter mentioned an argument. Not over labor. Over knowledge. The writer complained that certain buyers asked foolish questions before bidding. Questions concerning reading. Writing. Languages. Languages. Plural. The historian paused. Languages. That exceeded ordinary literacy. Very few enslaved people received such instruction. Even fewer could demonstrate it publicly. Where would such learning originate? Mission schools. Private tutoring. Foreign sailors. Religious instruction. None fit perfectly. Each possibility introduced new problems. Then another archive produced something even stranger. A customs office ledger. Routine shipping records. Cargo entering Charleston Harbor. Nothing unusual until one attached memorandum surfaced. It mentioned an unnamed enslaved interpreter assisting briefly with communication involving a foreign vessel. No age. No owner. No identifying marks. Only this observation. Remarkably composed. The historian read it twice. Interpreter. Not translator hired from abroad. Not government official. An enslaved interpreter. The memorandum ended abruptly. No follow-up. No payment listed. No official explanation. Almost as though someone preferred not to elaborate. Meanwhile, plantation correspondence revealed growing anxiety among owners throughout the Lowcountry. Rumors spread quickly. Literacy. Secret reading circles. Written messages. Forged travel passes. Stolen books. Most rumors proved exaggerated. Some did not. Fear amplified everything. One planter wrote that educated enslaved men inspired unhealthy confidence among others. Another insisted literacy should never extend beyond bookkeeping. Even practical education had limits. Control remained the priority. Always control. The historian noticed something else. Whenever Isaac appeared in surviving records, someone else's handwriting soon followed. Corrections. Cross-outs. Replacement pages. Missing signatures. Administrative confusion seemed to surround him. Perhaps coincidence. Perhaps ordinary record keeping. Or perhaps someone repeatedly altered the paper trail. One courthouse archive offered another clue. An appraisal prepared before an estate settlement. Several enslaved men received estimated values. One line had been crossed through so heavily that the original words nearly disappeared. Modern imaging later recovered portions beneath the ink. Not the entire sentence. Only enough. Education not. The remaining words vanished beneath deliberate strokes. Education not. Not what? Not disclosed. Not discussed. Not ordinary. No one knew. Yet someone had worked surprisingly hard to erase that phrase. The historian left the courthouse unsettled. Archives usually lose information through neglect. This looked different. Intentional. Measured. Careful. As though somebody understood exactly what needed disappearing. Then came the mini twist no one expected. Searching federal census schedules from 1860, the historian found a plantation matching several earlier records. Owner. Location. Workforce. Everything aligned. Everything except one detail. Isaac wasn't listed. Neither was anyone resembling him. Yet plantation correspondence written only weeks earlier clearly referred to his presence. He existed in private records. He vanished from public ones. That should have been impossible. Unless someone moved him. Quickly. Quietly. For reasons still hidden. And buried inside a forgotten shipping manifest dated only days after that missing census entry appeared a destination no researcher had connected to Isaac before. It wasn't another plantation. It wasn't another South Carolina county. It pointed toward New Orleans. The trail had just crossed state lines. And whatever happened next would make the mystery even harder to untangle. The shipping manifest raised more questions than it answered. It listed barrels of rice, crates of cotton goods, and several unnamed enslaved men transferred under a commercial contract. Most names were absent. That was not unusual. In many interstate transactions, enslaved people were recorded simply as numbers attached to bills of sale. But one line stood apart. A clerk had squeezed a brief note into the margin. Special handling upon arrival. No explanation followed. The historian stared at the faded words. Merchants did not usually annotate routine shipments. If someone required special handling, there had to be a reason. The destination was New Orleans. By 1860, it was one of the largest slave markets in North America. Thousands of enslaved people passed through the city every year. Families were separated. Skilled laborers brought high prices. Buyers arrived from across the Deep South. Once someone entered that market, tracing them became extraordinarily difficult. Records scattered across shipping firms, auction houses, county courthouses, and private collections. Many disappeared forever. Even so, the historian kept searching. Weeks later, another fragment surfaced. This time, it came from the account book of a Charleston commission merchant. The handwriting matched dozens of other entries. Payments, freight charges, insurance premiums. Then one curious expense. Books removed before transfer. The line was so ordinary that it could easily have been ignored. But books. Enslaved people rarely possessed books openly. Especially in South Carolina. If the notation referred to Isaac, it suggested something remarkable. Someone had searched his belongings, and they had found reading material worth recording. No titles were listed. No explanation. Only those 3 words. Books removed before transfer. The historian wondered whether the books had been religious, commercial, educational, or perhaps handwritten notes copied in secret. The answer remained hidden. Meanwhile, a separate archive in Louisiana produced an unexpected lead. Among the records of a New Orleans auction firm was a letter from a plantation owner in Mississippi. It requested advance notice if the educated fellow from Carolina became available. No name appeared. Only that description. The phrase was brief, almost careless, yet it carried enormous weight. It implied that word had already spread. Buyers knew someone unusual was arriving. Knowledge traveled faster than people. Slave traders exchanged information constantly. They discussed prices, skills, health, and reputation. If an enslaved man possessed exceptional abilities, rumors often followed him long before he reached the auction block. The historian compared dates. Everything fit. Charleston. Transfer. Arrival. Interest from Mississippi. But another document complicated the story. A surviving memorandum from the auction company included a crossed-out instruction. Do not demonstrate. The rest had been cut away when the page was trimmed decades earlier. Do not demonstrate. Demonstrate what? Reading. Writing. Arithmetic. Languages. No one could say. Still, the incomplete sentence suggested that someone had considered displaying a talent before changing course. That decision mattered. Auctioneers often highlighted profitable skills. Blacksmithing. Carpentry. Brickmaking. Why hide literacy if it could increase value? Unless it frightened more buyers than it attracted. The mystery deepened. A retired archivist offered another clue. Years earlier, he had cataloged a bundle of damaged plantation correspondence from Louisiana. Most of it concerned crop failures and debts. One letter mentioned an unnamed enslaved clerk recently purchased from South Carolina. The writer praised the man's extraordinary memory. Then the tone shifted. The next sentence had been scratched away with heavy ink. Not crossed out. Destroyed. The pressure of the pen nearly tore through the paper. Whatever those words had been, someone wanted them gone. The historian examined the page under magnification. Only scattered letters survived. Enough to identify a single word. School. Nothing more. School. The implications were unsettling. Formal education for an enslaved man in the antebellum South was exceptionally rare. If Isaac had somehow attended lessons, even secretly, many people would have faced legal and social consequences. Who had taught him? Where? For how long? The records refused to answer. At the Louisiana State Archives, another discovery emerged. It was buried inside a box labeled simply "Commercial Correspondence." Most researchers had overlooked it because it contained routine business papers. Near the bottom lay a folded receipt. Its purpose seemed ordinary. Ink. Paper. Writing supplies. Purchased on behalf of a plantation office. Attached to the receipt was a note. Lock cabinet after use. That instruction alone meant little. Until another inventory from the same plantation revealed that one cabinet contained ledgers copied in unusually elegant handwriting. Not the owner's handwriting. Not the overseer's. Someone else's. Someone remarkably consistent. Professional. Disciplined. The plantation owner later boasted in a letter that his financial books were the finest in the county. He never identified who kept them. The omission felt deliberate. The historian began noticing a pattern. Whenever exceptional penmanship appeared, names disappeared. Whenever literacy surfaced, identity faded. It was as though the talent could be acknowledged. The man behind it could not. Then came another twist. A Mississippi tax inventory listed an enslaved bookkeeper valued at nearly twice the average price of skilled field hands. Again, no name. Only an occupation. Bookkeeper. Such positions existed, but they were uncommon. The timing aligned almost perfectly with Isaac's disappearance from South Carolina records. Still, there was no definitive proof. Only another fragment. Another shadow. Another possibility. Not everyone welcomed such discoveries. One historian argued that researchers were connecting unrelated documents. Another insisted the evidence remained too thin. Healthy skepticism filled the discussion. Yet even the skeptics admitted something unusual. Too many records hinted at the same kind of man. Educated. Trusted. Hidden. Unnamed. The pattern was difficult to dismiss. Meanwhile, descendants of one plantation-owning family donated boxes of private papers to a university archive. Most contained household expenses, crop reports, legal disputes. Then a folded letter emerged. Its edges had blackened with age. The author warned another planter never to permit that Carolina fellow access to visiting businessmen without supervision. The wording was cautious, almost nervous. Not because the man was violent. Because he spoke too well. Those 3 words lingered. He spoke too well. Speech itself had become a source of concern. An educated voice challenged assumptions. It unsettled expectations. It invited questions. Questions were dangerous, especially in a society built upon rigid ideas of race and hierarchy. The historian left the archive convinced that Isaac, if that was truly his name, had become more than valuable property. He had become a problem. Not because he could read. Because others noticed that he could. And once knowledge became visible, it became impossible to fully contain. Then, buried inside a county courthouse collection that had survived the Civil War almost untouched, researchers uncovered something no one expected. A sealed envelope. Never mailed. Never opened. Addressed only to a judge. Inside was a sworn statement from a white witness who claimed to have watched an enslaved man quietly correct a legal document after noticing an accounting error that every official in the room had missed. The witness never identified the man by name. But he ended his statement with a sentence that stopped the historian cold. The gentleman purchasing him appeared less pleased by his intelligence than frightened by it. Why frightened? And what had the buyer learned that never made it into the official record? Those answers were waiting in another file, one that had remained unopened for more than a century. The unopened file had been misfiled for decades. It sat inside a collection labeled as routine commercial disputes. Nothing about the folder suggested it contained anything unusual. Its cover bore no names. Only a case number. Inside were fewer than a dozen pages. Most dealt with an unpaid shipment of cotton moving between New Orleans and Natchez. The paperwork seemed ordinary. Bills. Receipts. Affidavits. Nothing that would attract attention. Then a folded memorandum appeared between 2 accounting sheets. It had never been entered into the official court record. The paper carried no seal. No clerk's notation. Just hurried handwriting. The first sentence immediately caught the historian's attention. The clerk in question is not to prepare further correspondence. The wording was strange. It referred to the clerk. Not an overseer. Not a merchant. Simply the clerk. Yet the plantation listed in the file employed no white clerk during that period. Its owner handled most financial matters personally. So who was being described? Another sentence offered a clue. His abilities have attracted unnecessary notice. Again, no name. No explanation. Only growing concern. The historian compared the handwriting with letters from the same plantation owner. It matched. Whoever wrote the memorandum was deeply worried. But not about missing money. Not about poor harvests. About attention. Attention was dangerous. Especially in 1860. Southern newspapers had become increasingly anxious about abolitionist literature reaching enslaved communities. Planters exchanged warnings through private correspondence. Suspicion spread quickly. A man known for reading and writing could easily become the subject of rumor. Even if he had done nothing wrong. The file contained one final sheet. Its edges were badly burned. Most of the text had disappeared. Only scattered phrases remained. Visitors. Questions asked. Transfer advised. That final phrase lingered. Transfer advised. It suggested someone wanted the man moved again. Not sold for profit. Relocated for discretion. The distinction mattered. The historian turned to plantation journals from western Mississippi. One volume had survived almost untouched because it had remained in a family attic for generations. The entries rarely mentioned enslaved individuals by name. Instead, they focused on weather, crop yields, and business expenses. Then one short entry broke the pattern. The Carolina man keeps accounts adequately, though conversation is discouraged. Conversation is discouraged. The sentence felt almost clinical. Yet it hinted at something larger. No punishment was mentioned. No accusation. Only an instruction. Keep him working. Limit his speech. The historian wondered why. Another page supplied part of the answer. Several neighboring planters had visited the property that same month. The journal recorded their inspection of new equipment and irrigation systems. At the bottom of the page appeared a brief observation. One guest expressed disbelief regarding the clerk. Nothing else. No names. No details. But disbelief implied surprise. Perhaps even shock. The historian searched neighboring collections. Eventually, he found a private letter written by one of those visitors. It described the plantation in glowing terms. Healthy crops. Improved drainage. Efficient management. Then came one curious sentence. I would not have believed the reports had I not witnessed the fellow myself. Again. No name. Only the fellow. The writer offered no further explanation. Yet the phrase suggested rumors had already spread through planter society. Rumors of an educated enslaved man. Rumors many dismissed. Until they saw him. The historian noticed another pattern. Every surviving description emphasized restraint. Not rebellion. Not defiance. Calmness. Precision. Discipline. Witnesses repeatedly described the same qualities. Measured speech. Excellent memory. Careful handwriting. Professional conduct. That consistency strengthened the case that multiple documents referred to the same individual. Then the trail shifted unexpectedly. A county sheriff's ledger listed an unusual request. Not an arrest. Not a warrant. A request for temporary security during a private business meeting. Such requests occasionally occurred when large sums of money changed hands. But the meeting took place on a plantation rather than at a courthouse. The sheriff's deputy left one intriguing remark. Discussion became heated concerning future disposition. Future disposition. Disposition of whom? No answer followed. The plantation owner later crossed through the deputy's invoice. Payment remained unsettled. The historian wondered whether the argument involved Isaac. Or someone remarkably similar. Another archive produced a surprising piece of evidence. A shipping insurance company had preserved correspondence with plantation owners across the Gulf South. One letter complained that an unnamed enslaved clerk had become too widely discussed among commercial acquaintances. Commercial acquaintances. Not neighbors. Businessmen. Merchants. Bankers. People who valued information. The complaint revealed growing discomfort. Knowledge had escaped the plantation. People were talking. Even if quietly. The historian sensed the pressure building. Every new document suggested the same outcome. Move him. Hide him. Limit access. Reduce attention. The concern seemed almost coordinated. Yet no central authority appeared behind it. Only individual decisions producing the same result. Then came the mini twist. Inside a New Orleans bank archive, researchers found several copied financial ledgers from 1860. The handwriting looked familiar. Painfully familiar. The same elegant lettering appeared in plantation books from Mississippi. The spacing matched. The flourishes matched. Even the formation of certain capital letters appeared identical. A handwriting specialist examined digital scans. His conclusion was cautious. He could not declare certainty. But he believed the documents were highly consistent with a single trained writer. If true, the same enslaved man may have kept financial records across multiple states. That would explain the scattered trail. It would also explain why his identity became harder to trace. His work traveled farther than his name. Yet another mystery remained. Why would a plantation owner allow such a valuable man to leave? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. A damaged probate inventory following the owner's death. Among furniture, livestock, and equipment appeared one brief notation. Clerk absent under temporary arrangement. Absent. Not sold. Not deceased. Not escaped. Absent. The wording implied movement without permanent transfer. Some kind of loan. Or shared business arrangement. Such agreements occasionally occurred between wealthy planters. Especially when bookkeeping expertise was scarce. If Isaac had become known for exceptional skill, other plantations may have borrowed his labor. Not publicly. Quietly. The historian felt the pieces beginning to align. But one final discovery unsettled everything again. A minister's diary from late 1860 recorded a visit to the plantation. Most entries concerned sermons and donations. Then came a sentence unlike any other. The colored clerk possesses learning beyond expectation. I fear it places him in continual danger. No elaboration followed. The minister never mentioned him again. Yet those words carried unusual weight. Not admiration. Not condemnation. Concern. Real concern. Danger from whom? Other enslaved people. There was no evidence of that. Outside agitators. None appeared in the record. The greater danger seemed to come from visibility itself. Every person who recognized the clerk's abilities created another witness. Another rumor. Another risk. Another reason for someone in power to make him disappear from public attention. As the historian packed his notes, one final document arrived from a small regional archive that had only recently finished cataloging its Civil War-era collections. It wasn't a ledger, or a court record, or a plantation journal. It was a letter written in December 1860 by a Charleston businessman to his partner. Near the bottom, almost hidden between discussions of cotton prices and political unrest, appeared a sentence that changed the direction of the entire investigation. The Carolina scholar has become entangled in matters beyond commerce. Beyond commerce. What did that mean? The next surviving letter was missing. And with it, perhaps, the explanation historians had been searching for all along. The phrase refused to leave the historian's mind. Beyond commerce. It did not sound like the language of a merchant discussing profits. It sounded like a warning. The problem was that the next letter in the collection no longer existed. The archive's catalog showed it had once been part of the same bundle. Decades earlier, someone had recorded it as missing before accession. No one knew when it disappeared. Or why. The remaining correspondence, however, revealed a noticeable change in tone. Business gave way to anxiety. Merchants who normally discussed freight rates and insurance suddenly wrote about uncertainty. Not because of one enslaved clerk. Because the entire South was beginning to unravel. Abraham Lincoln had been elected in November 1860. South Carolina's political leaders responded with extraordinary speed. Meetings multiplied. Newspapers printed speeches warning of disunion. Charleston buzzed with rumors. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same question. What would happen next? Plantation owners became increasingly cautious. Travel was monitored more closely. Business records were guarded. Trusted employees, both free and enslaved, found themselves under greater scrutiny. Against that backdrop, the references to the educated man became even more unusual. Several records simply stopped mentioning him altogether. The silence was impossible to ignore. The historian turned away from plantation papers and began searching county legal files. There, buried among property disputes, he found an affidavit signed by two white businessmen. Neither mentioned an enslaved man by name. Instead, they complained that sensitive financial information had somehow spread beyond a private meeting. No accusation followed. Only suspicion. One sentence stood apart. Only the clerk remained present throughout the discussion. The statement raised immediate questions. If the clerk was enslaved, why was he allowed to hear confidential negotiations? The answer was probably simple. He was trusted. Or had been. Trust, however, could disappear overnight. Especially when politics became unstable. A separate ledger from the same county showed something unexpected. Payments normally made to a commercial copying service abruptly stopped. Instead, copies of contracts began appearing in elegant handwriting that matched several plantation books the historian had already examined. The same disciplined lettering. The same careful spacing. The same unmistakable style. Someone had become indispensable. Yet nowhere did that person's name appear. The omission no longer felt accidental. It felt intentional. The historian shared the samples with another archival specialist. The expert spent days comparing digital enlargements. He remained cautious. Handwriting analysis could suggest similarities. It could not identify a person with certainty. Still, one observation caught everyone's attention. The writer had been formally trained. Not merely taught to write. Trained. Letters maintained consistent proportions. Margins remained precise. Numbers followed commercial conventions used by professional clerks. Those habits usually developed through years of practice. Not secret lessons stolen whenever opportunity allowed. That realization changed everything. If Isaac, or whatever his true name had been, possessed that level of skill, someone had invested significant time in his education. Who would take such a risk? The question had no easy answer. Then another discovery complicated the story. Among the private papers of a South Carolina attorney lay a folded memorandum dated only weeks before the state's secession. Most of it dealt with estate settlements. Near the bottom appeared a brief instruction. Delay valuation until the Carolina property arrives. Property. Singular. Not property holdings. Not equipment. Just property. The timing aligned with the trail that had led researchers west. But another note appeared beneath it. Written in different ink. Educational qualifications not to influence assessment. The historian read the sentence twice. It made little business sense. Auction values reflected useful skills. Education, when acknowledged, could increase commercial value. Why instruct appraisers to ignore it? Unless the owner feared that advertising such abilities would attract the wrong kind of attention. Not from buyers. From officials. Or political observers. Or perhaps neighboring planters already uneasy about educated enslaved men. The records remained frustratingly incomplete. Then came another twist. A forgotten notebook belonging to a traveling Presbyterian minister surfaced during the cataloging of a church archive. Its entries documented sermons delivered across Mississippi and Louisiana during late 1860. Most pages contained little beyond dates and locations. One page was different. The minister described dining with several plantation owners after Sunday services. Their conversation drifted from politics to labor. Then he wrote a single remarkable sentence. They spoke of one educated servant as though he were both an asset and a liability. Asset. Liability. Both at once. The contradiction echoed everything the historian had already uncovered. The educated man generated value. He also generated fear. The minister offered no name. Yet his wording suggested the discussion had become uncomfortable. He changed the subject immediately afterward. As though even recording the conversation made him uneasy. The weeks passed. Research continued. Then the historian visited a university archive holding one of the largest collections of antebellum commercial records in the South. Thousands of uncatalogued documents waited inside climate-controlled rooms. Most researchers searched by plantation name. He searched by handwriting. It was a gamble. For 3 days he found nothing. On the fourth afternoon, a clerk produced a damaged account book acquired from a private family estate. Its cover had separated from the binding. Several pages were missing. But the handwriting. It was unmistakable. The same graceful script. The same mathematical precision. Halfway through the volume appeared an unusual correction. Someone else had attempted to alter a financial calculation. The original clerk had quietly rewritten the entire page beneath it. No complaint. No note. Just perfect arithmetic. The historian recalculated the figures. The correction had prevented a costly error. Without it, the plantation would have underreported thousands of dollars in annual revenue. The educated clerk had protected his owner's finances. Yet there was no acknowledgement. No reward recorded. Only silence. Near the back of the book lay a folded slip of paper. Unlike everything else, it had been tucked loosely between the pages rather than sewn into the binding. Its edges suggested it had been hidden deliberately. The note contained only 2 lines. He asks too many questions. Move him before winter. No signature. No date. No destination. The historian sat motionless. For months, the records had portrayed a careful, disciplined man. Not rebellious. Not reckless. Simply intelligent. Now another possibility emerged. Perhaps it was not his education alone that frightened people. Perhaps it was what he did with it. He noticed inconsistencies. He understood contracts. He recognized numbers. He may have seen financial dealings, estate transfers, and legal arrangements that others assumed an enslaved man could never comprehend. Knowledge changes the way a person sees the world. And sometimes, it changes the way others see him. The historian packed away the fragile notebook. One question remained unanswered. What became of the educated clerk after 1860? The Civil War would soon transform everything. Plantations. Markets. Governments. Records. Lives. If he survived long enough to witness emancipation, the paper trail might continue under an entirely different name. Or perhaps the trail ended before the war ever reached him. Just as he prepared to leave the archive, an archivist called him back. A newly donated collection had arrived only hours earlier. Inside was an old family Bible. Tucked between its pages rested a faded scrap of paper bearing a single handwritten sentence. It was not a prayer. It was not a family record. It appeared to be an instruction. And at the bottom, for the first time in the entire investigation, there was a full signature. The name did not read Isaac. It read something else entirely. The signature changed everything. For months, the historian had searched for a man called Isaac. Now, a single slip of paper suggested that Isaac may never have been his true name at all. The name written at the bottom was Josiah. Not Isaac. Not even a similar spelling. Just one carefully written word. Josiah. The paper offered no surname. That was hardly surprising. Enslaved people were rarely recorded with consistent family names, and many appeared under different names throughout their lives, depending on the preferences of those who claimed ownership. Still, the discovery forced the historian to reconsider every document he had collected. Perhaps Isaac had been an assigned name. Perhaps Josiah had been the name he chose for himself. Or perhaps both names belonged to different moments in the same life. The uncertainty reflected a broader reality of slavery. Identity itself could become unstable. Names changed after sales. Ages shifted between inventories. Families were divided. The written record often reflected the priorities of enslavers rather than the lives of the people they held in bondage. Tracing any one individual across decades was extraordinarily difficult. Tracing an educated enslaved man who had been transferred repeatedly was even harder. The historian returned to the archives one final time. Instead of searching plantation records, he focused on documents created after the Civil War. The Freedmen's Bureau. Labor contracts. Voter registration lists. Church records. School reports. These collections had helped researchers reconnect countless lives interrupted by slavery. If the man had survived the war, perhaps he had finally left a record in his own name. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then one entry appeared in a bureau register from 1866. It listed a black schoolteacher employed near Vicksburg, Mississippi. His first name was Josiah. The surname had faded almost completely. The age was close. The birthplace was recorded simply as South Carolina. That alone proved nothing. Thousands of formerly enslaved people had been born there. Yet another detail stood out. The official who completed the register added a rare remark. Excellent penman assists with accounts. The historian froze. Those 4 words echoed nearly every fragment he had collected. Excellent penman. Assist with accounts. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Still, no document stated outright that this Josiah had once been sold in Charleston. History rarely offers certainty. More often it offers patterns. Fragments. Connections that grow stronger as evidence accumulates. The historian resisted the temptation to claim more than the records allowed. Instead, he built a careful case. The Charleston Ledger. The plantation account books. The merchant correspondence. The minister's diary. The Mississippi financial records. The Freedmen's Bureau register. Individually, each document revealed very little. Together, they described the outline of a remarkable life. A man whose literacy repeatedly appeared in the margins of history. A man valued for his mind but denied recognition for it. A man whose handwriting survived more faithfully than his name. The researcher presented his findings at a regional historical conference. The audience listened quietly. Archivists, genealogists, professors, local historians. No one argued that every mystery had been solved. Instead, discussion centered on something larger. How many other educated enslaved men had disappeared into anonymous records? How many plantation ledgers concealed evidence that generations of researchers had overlooked? How many stories remained hidden simply because no one had thought to compare archives across several states? The questions lingered long after the presentation ended. In the months that followed, other researchers began examining collections with fresh eyes. Unexpected discoveries followed. An overlooked business ledger in Louisiana. A church membership roll in Mississippi. A shipping invoice from Charleston. None conclusively identified the same man. Yet each revealed another educated enslaved clerk whose abilities had been noted only briefly before disappearing into silence. The pattern extended beyond one individual. It suggested a forgotten network of skilled men whose labor supported plantations, businesses, and legal offices while their identities faded from public memory. Their knowledge had never been entirely erased. It had simply been buried beneath records that few people bothered to read closely. The historian often reflected on one detail above all others. Not the elegant handwriting. Not the mysterious transfers. Not even the changing names. It was that simple instruction written years earlier in the margin of a plantation ledger. Keep from visitors. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary management note. By the end of the investigation, it seemed to carry a different meaning. Knowledge was valuable. Visible knowledge was dangerous. The man behind that note may have challenged assumptions every time he picked up a pen. Not through speeches. Not through violence. Simply by demonstrating an education that many around him insisted could not exist. Whether his birth name was Isaac, Josiah, or something else entirely may never be known with certainty. The surviving records are incomplete. Some were destroyed by war. Others vanished through neglect. Many were never created in the first place. That is the enduring challenge of researching lives shaped by slavery. The archives preserve remarkable details. But they also preserve profound silences. Sometimes those silences tell their own story. They remind us that history is not only what was written down. It is also what was crossed out. What was omitted? What was hidden between the lines of ledgers, inventories, and account books? The mystery of the educated man auctioned through Charleston may never be solved completely. Yet his story reflects a documented truth about the antebellum South. Despite laws intended to suppress literacy, enslaved people found ways to learn. Some were taught in secret. Some taught themselves. Some acquired skills because enslavers saw economic value in education, only to fear the consequences later. Those lives deserve careful study, honest scholarship, and thoughtful remembrance. Every newly cataloged archive, every restored ledger, and every forgotten family collection has the potential to reveal another piece of that history. Sometimes the smallest note in the margin becomes the most important discovery of all. If this story encouraged you to look at history with fresh eyes, consider subscribing for more forgotten lives, overlooked records, and historical mysteries grounded in the evidence that still survives today.